Nation of Fit and 10, welcome to day 50 of the challenge. Day 50. Scans wrapped up today, and I was very, very happy with the results. Overall, the results were really, really good, especially some people who had a hard time from the first to the second scan. We obviously saw a huge improvement in a lot of you from your second to third scan, so kudos to you for that. Yeah, I mean, really, really good. I would say probably, just thinking about all the challenges, one of the best overall second to third scan periods that I've seen throughout all the challenges that I've done. Maybe the best. So kudos to you guys. Okay, yesterday I talked about carb cycling, and I just want to talk a little bit more about it here, and I want to get right to the point here. If you, all other things being equal, if you cycle your carbohydrates through the week, or you keep your carbohydrate levels at the same level, and at the end of the week, whether you carbohydrate cycle or you keep them, we'll just call isocaloric through the week, okay, so the same every day. If the total amount of carbohydrates week to week is the same, you're not going to see any difference, okay? So you're going to see very, very little difference. Now, there are some advantages to carbohydrate cycling. It is something that is a little bit more advanced, and there are some nuances to it in terms of, I think I talked about this yesterday, in terms of fat levels that I would assign certain days, and even protein levels as well. But we won't talk about that today. But I will mention 5 things here that five benefits, or 5 things that make carbohydrate cycling a little bit more advantageous. Okay, and that's not necessarily related to fat loss. But number 1, you can kind of have reward days. You can have days essentially where you dig a little bit more. Okay, where you're at a little bit more of a deficit essentially, calorically, or not for that matter. You don't have to be going. You can replace your carbohydrates with fat, and then you can have days where you get basically reward, right? Where you get more carbohydrates, and this for most people would be very, very rewarding. So there is that aspect to it. Okay, you get these days where you get higher carbohydrates, so these are things to look forward to. Number 2, I mentioned this yesterday, thyroid health. If you are, for example, doing lower carbohydrates just for extended periods of time without putting in any higher carbohydrate days, you're going to, over time, this takes some time obviously, that if you go low carbohydrates over time, you're going to have some negative impact on your thyroid, okay? More than likely you will. So having these higher days can help to offset that, and I mentioned that yesterday. Number 3, improved insulin sensitivity, especially if you're doing prolonged lower carbohydrates, you're going to get better insulin sensitivity. Just think of this as your body is getting better, your body's getting better at managing sugar. Number 4, again, this is a little bit more advanced here, but workout timing, I mentioned about this yesterday. You can fuel for certain workouts, so you can save your high carbohydrate days for the days where you do your bigger or your more intensive workouts, for example, legs or back. Some of these more larger muscle group based days where you're doing maybe a little more volume, where it's a little bit more cardiovascular, or I should say a little bit more energy intensive. And so you could save it for, either the day before those workouts, you do a high carbohydrate day, or maybe you do them on the day of. So there's an advantage to that, because there's a big difference between fueling up for training your arms versus training your legs. A big difference there. Number 5, it breaks up the mundaneness of diet. So if you're going through the same, if every day your numbers are the same, this can get perhaps a bit mundane. Whereas if you're having days where things are changing, they're fluctuating, then it keeps things a little bit more, or can keep things a little bit more interesting. But as I mentioned yesterday, it just requires that much more methodology. Essentially, you've got to be on track every day, that much more in terms of, okay, how are we going to set up the carbohydrates for the day? What are we going to have? And you can't, it makes winging your diet that much harder, right? So For example, my calories are even throughout the day. And well, I do have basically the same meals every day. I do switch them up a little bit, and I don't have to necessarily pre-plan. Whereas if I carbohydrate cycled, I would definitely have to plan in advance. I couldn't just, it would make doing it on the spot a little bit harder. Like I'd have to, be thinking much more. So, all right, so there's some advantages to carbohydrate cycling. 5.5 minutes. Can I get to another question here? Okay, this person asks, how to maintain muscle mass when sick or injured? All right, let's talk about when you're sick. When you're sick, you just rest. But I will say this, you can easily maintain muscle doing much, much less. Okay, so you can, basically what I'm saying is that, once you have got to a certain level with your muscle mass, you don't have to keep doing this super crazy intensity to maintain that level. You can back off. In fact, I would advise, especially if you're working out really hard, I would advise going through periods where you back off a fair amount and just give your body a bit of a break. Work on getting blood flow into the muscles, but not going to full exhaustion. Instead of working at a capacity of an 8 or 9 or 10 out of 10, you're working at a 5 or 6 out of 10. And you're going to maintain your muscle mass fine. In fact, you may even improve during these weeks, just allowing your body to recuperate that much more. Injury, let's talk about that tomorrow, okay? But generally when you're sick, okay, typically speaking, you're not going to be sick for that long, okay? Maybe 2, 3, 4 days, hopefully at the most. And in that case, you just want to rest as much as you can. Just rest, okay? If you can move about a little bit, I would recommend that. But other than that, rest as much as you can. You don't want to tax your body. You don't want to have it go through recovery. All right, message of the day. On this day 50, I've already said this in maybe different wording, but consistency of the right things. Consistency of the right things will knock the crap out of motivation every single time. Motivation wanes. Motivation comes and goes. Motivation is not something you can rely on. There's nobody that's ever motivated all the time. What you have to do is build habits. You have to build habits. Build the habits. Once they become habits, it becomes much easier, and it's not based on motivation. It's just based on clockwork. It's just based on essentially, being a robot, doing these things that you have to do, right? So work on the consistency, work on building habits. When they become a habit, it just becomes way easier. Okay, once you get used to doing something over and over again, it becomes easier. It doesn't become harder, it becomes easier. Okay, consistency will knock the crap out of motivation every single time. Positive energy, positive vibes, believe in yourself, and for the love of God, give some gratitude. We got 20 days to go. I want you to keep pushing forward, and I want you to keep believing in what you're doing and staying positive, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.